Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good, thank you. And want to visit today with a area of the world that we've talked about many, many times, yes. But it came alive recently, even though it's been smoldering for a long time. And that has to do with the Saudis and their allies' attack on Yemen.
Yes.
It's been going on. We're one of the allies. Israel's an ally. And, of course, they said it was all Iran's fault.
Yeah.
Of course, 4 years ago, we participated in and continue to participate in an invasion, a ruthless invasion, and an attempt at total occupation. And many Houthis were killed. And yet they've been fighting back. They're fighting for their homeland. And I'm sure their cheerleader is Iran. Yeah. But as far as Iranian soldiers go, there's no evidence that happened. But we haven't heard much that they've been able to do. It's overwhelming, but recently there were some cracks in their military machine. You know, like the UAE dropped out. They dropped out of it, and we do know that the Saudis don't have a real military force. They have our weapons, our technology, and then they have to go out and hire some mercenaries. Yeah. But anyway, I guess it looks like they might have been caught off by surprise. So all of a sudden there was a major attack by the Houthis and crossed borders and went in, and it looks to me, the evidence is that they probably won this thing, and it looks like it could be a major victory. And you'd think that by now, maybe Trump would change his mind about this, but he's been so loyal to the Saudis because it was good for business, and we could sell more weapons. But I don't know how he can keep defending, MbS. I mean, he's going to lose too. The Saudis are going to lose, and the Houthis are doing better, and they're going to be pretty excited about this. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the near future, like today, tomorrow, and this week. But I do not think that the Saudis are in the mood or quite capable of saying we're going to teach them a lesson and we're going to march in there and capture 1,000 of their people, which is, they indicated that there could have been 1,000 military people from Saudi Arabia captured by the Houthis.
Actually, even more than that, the claim is that 500 fighters are killed and up to 3 Saudi brigades captured. They say 2,000 soldiers at least. Yeah. And it was an extraordinary day yesterday when the Houthi commander came out and gave an extensive briefing and showed a lot of video that certainly seemed to back their claims, because they also showed dozens and dozens and dozens of U.S. manufactured military vehicles, armed personnel carriers, all sorts of Toyota pickups, a lot of light and medium arms, missiles and everything. In fact, we have a little bit of video from the Houthi commander's briefing. Maybe we'll show 15 or 20 seconds of it just to get a sense of what he was talking about. So it looks like really miles and miles of people clamoring to surrender. And we'll see throughout, we have a few pictures we'll show as we keep speaking, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weapons surrendered, rocket launchers, etc. So this is a major defeat. It was very, very carefully planned. They took video of it when they routed them, when they caught them on a mountain road and captured them. If everything is as it says, and it's been reported everywhere now, this is probably one of the most successful military maneuvers in history.
You know, it's interesting that you know, when the oil fields were bombed, the Houthis took credit for it, and of course, Saudi side said, "Oh, no way, they're not capable." It had to be Iran. But you know what? This builds more credibility on the success of the Houthis on that bombing, because not only did they have the technology, they had the will. They had the will to go in there and defend their country and try to, you know, kick the invaders out and try to teach them a lesson, because 4 years is a little bit too long. So it makes that previous episode look even bigger, and this is on top of it. But you know, in the big picture is also a reflection on the United States, because I've always worked with the assumption that because of our bankruptcy and because of our flawed foreign policy, that we will eventually lose credibility. This didn't help our credibility. I mean, think of the money involved and all the weaponry we have and all we have done. And Trump has been a really bold cheerleader for Saudi Arabia. He's never missed any words, and he's even been truthful enough to say, you know, this is good for jobs and things like this. But I think this is a setback, and you know, when we on the Tet Offensive, it was handwriting was on the wall, and not too long after that we had to leave. I don't know what will happen here, but maybe the Saudis will just say, we've had enough of this. I imagine the Saudi people, they're not even fighting. I mean, they're hiring people to fight. I imagine the Saudis are, and you know, their budget is not a guarantee either. Everybody say, well, they have all this money. There's a question of how much oil they really have. So they might have to retrench. They've already had to retrench on a daily basis. You just showed it. They were retrenching in a hurry. So this is a terrible way to look for good news, but I think the failure of aggression is good news. It's just so sad to me that they have to, the first, that they initiate aggression, and the second is that you have to go through this to try to keep people from doing it. But morally, a country and a people have a right to try to thwart, you know, invaders and killers, and if you want to add up how many Yemenis have been killed over this? Thousands.
At least, definitely. Well, not only does it make the Saudis look like liars, and they say, oh yeah, for sure, Iran did it, it makes someone else look like a liar, and that guy's name is Pompeo. Because if you remember, 3 hours after the strike, here's what Pompeo essentially said, right? Here's my version of it. The Houthis are too stupid to have done it, so it had to be Iran. That's essentially what he said. They're not capable of such a complicated... Well, they have just been capable of routing the most expensively equipped military probably in the world, with the most high-tech weapons in the world, with the backers of the U.S., as you point out, the Israelis and others. Here they have been routed for 3 days. This rout went on. And interestingly enough, in the middle of this, that's when the talks between the Houthis and the Saudis agreed on a limited ceasefire. So the Saudis knew they were in the middle of getting their tails whipped, and they still agreed. So Pompeo is also shown to be nothing but a liar. Attention, President Trump, you got a problem.
You know, and I think also this makes the point that foot soldiers are boots on the ground is still an issue. It might not be the way you go in and attack a country. It might not be a very, good way to start a war. But here it turned out that what the Houthis did is they marched in, and they were determined, and they took the risk, and they won this thing. So I would think the Saudis are going to have to retrench and rethink all this, and hopefully they'll come to their senses. But what about our government? I mean, we live here. We pay the taxes. We've been harping on this for years, and always trying. I can remember, Daniel, way back at the beginning of the century, that I think it was the coal ship that was hit in the Yemen, and I made comments, and I have a sharp criticism because I was saying we don't need to be in there, and there were some pro-Israel people that got on my case, and they said, "Boy, you're not talking the right way." So this has been around, but obviously the invasion started 4 years ago, and that's they're over the top, and so I hope the American people will put some more pressure, because Trump has been pretty determined. The only thing you can give him credit for, this is one area where he's been very consistent on maintaining this, but he has to be careful on analyzing the deep state, who are the deep state, and when they're on on his side or not. And of course, we're convinced that the deep state is very involved in foreign policy. I mean,
Yeah.
foreign policy, even by people who aren't technically in the government. And when you know that the CIA is involved with our foreign policy, they're the ones who bring about these coups and regime change. We do it all the time. So it's something, though, that the American people are still inspired by, the great empire, but I think a lot less so than they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, something has really shifted with these past two things. And actually, even we have a few pictures we can show from this as we talk. But, the sort of the myth of the invincibility and invulnerability of the U.S. military might has been broken because, as Pompeo says, these are not the most sophisticated military in the world. However, you look at what they've been able to do, you see, and these are American-made vehicles. They've all been captured, dozens and dozens of these captured. Probably the Iranians are going to reap some benefits, from looking into the, internal electronics and what have you. But this really says that you can have the most expensive stuff, all the goodies in the world. But if your heart is not in the fight, if you're just some poor kid from Somalia who signs up, you're not going to win. And as you always say, when you're fighting for your homeland, it's a different story.
And I think an analogy can even be gone back a bit further to our revolution. What were the odds of the colonists being able to defeat the greatest empire ever? And they had, the existence at that particular time, and the British had to back off, and the colonists won. So homeland fighting is a very strong image, and that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And I just hope that we can build up the qualities of our country so that if and when we have to, we always have to defend ourselves, not literally by the military, but by other reasons. That is the reason why the quality of life and the beliefs that we have and how determined we are to protect liberty makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, so anyway, that is absolutely correct. And the other issue that we want to deal with, I think, as we move on to the implications of our foreign policy, is something that's also captured our attention. Usually on Monday we get into Dr. Paul and think, gosh, not a lot happened over the weekend. What are we going to talk about? I don't know about you, but I spent all day Saturday reading everything I could as the events developed on this so-called impeachment process, and as they unwound, and how it's really, I think someone else says, Russiagate's become Ukrainegate, but it's essentially the same thing. So, I mean, maybe we can shift gears and talk about this incredible.
Well, the first thing that caught my attention over the weekend is when the report came out that we had heard about the whistleblower, and we had heard that, they're going to use his report, and then we heard that he didn't hear anything. It was hearsay. It was gossip, and they were still going to use it. They can't possibly define that as a whistleblower and give him protection. But it turns out, and so far it looks like it's been repeated, that somebody in the intelligence community was able to take one of the rules that said that you had to verify, you had to have corroboration, you had to have firsthand, not some guy that just was heard down the street. Oh yeah, I heard so and so. Oh, okay, indict him, convict him, and that's it. Let's open up this can of worms on impeachment and talk about how we're going to get rid of this president. So they did that, but they changed the rules, and then shortly thereafter, they were able to do this because the guy doesn't have any. He couldn't have fit the credentials. He couldn't have been qualified as a whistleblower and then protected. How much do they really care about protecting a whistleblower? And this is the part that always gripes me, is when it comes to, Edward Snowden or a guy like Assange or coup or any of these other people who are real whistleblowers and risk their lives and their career for it. Who defends them? Nobody in the administration. Who wants to put them in prison? Democrats and Republicans. So all this baloney about caring about the country and the Constitution. This is the Pelosi. We have to defend this is an obligation we have to defend our Constitution. We're going to lose our democracy if this happens. It is so much garbage, really. It's amazing. It's amazing how much they get away with it. And then the media reports all this nonsense with a straight face, like this is very serious business, that we find out who this whistleblower is. You'd wonder, you know, and the theory is that this one CIA agent could have worked in the White House.
Yeah, he was in the White House, yeah.
Well, I just found it. Why, if somebody is looking for the deep state, why wouldn't you clean out the White House first?
Yeah,
you know, and this whole thing, and you wonder about executive orders. They're way out of control. But what about a rule change like this? Don't you think a president might have some way of dealing with this? You know, but the one thing is, if the White House means anything, if it's the home of the president, there should be some protection on that. He should be able to tell who he is allowed to have in there, and that this idea that you can have the very people that belong to the groups that's trying to participate in a coup of the president.
Yeah, and I like the way you put it in your column this morning. You know, you don't have to be a big fan of the president to say something really stinks about, something is rotten in Denmark here. And, you know, just dealing with the whistleblower complaint, if that's what it is, because a lot of people speculate it may have been written by Adam Schiff and his staff, because it doesn't read like, here's what I saw, like an affidavit. It reads like a legal briefing. But here's the point. He got it all wrong. The whole thing wasn't true. He said 8 times President Trump demanded that Zelensky look into this. He did no such thing. He said there was an explicit quid pro quo. There was no such thing. And in fact, during that talk, as came out over the weekend, during that phone call, the Ukrainians didn't have any idea that the aid had been stalled. You know, it looks like it was stalled just as Trump said, because nobody else was kicking in. And so it was stalled before, so they had no idea that. So you can't have a quid pro, you can't be extorting them, you can't be blackmailing them if they have no idea what the bait is being held out in front of them. So, and the other thing is, if you read the transcript, if you read the White House official document of it, the whole mention of Biden is in a different context, in a different paragraph than the section where he says, hey, can you do us a favor? Can you look into this CrowdStrike thing? Because essentially there was plenty of information that the Ukrainians were involved in helping Hillary. That's something that never came out. And that they may even have a copy of the server. Hey, do us a favor, can you look into this? You'd think that it's in the public interest to know if the Ukrainians know something about who meddled in our election. And even, you know, as even the Biden thing is in a separate paragraph, and there's no saying, hey, please do this for us. But even in that case, is there not a public interest in knowing whether the then vice president's son is involved in corruption? Because that makes the whole point about the coup. The coup was actually all about corruption.
You know, it just may be that there are not a lot of saints in Ukraine, because the people that might be able to reveal some of this might have been partners with the corruption that was going on. So, but the one thing they do not talk about was I guess it was 2011 when the coup occurred, and we helped get rid of we put in Poroshenko, Yanukovych, we helped get rid of. We sort of handpicked him. And who did that? Republicans and Democrats. And that's where the mess comes. But I think it's interesting that the whole thing is impractical to go to some of the government officials there. But now I see a former politician in Ukraine is volunteering, said, yes, you should investigate it, because he probably wasn't in on the deal. But it is... This gets confusing. I'm sure we get some of this stuff mixed up a little bit. But to me, it just goes back. If we lived in a world that makes a lot more sense, and that is non-interventionism, we wouldn't even be dealing with it. First, we wouldn't have been involved with the coup, and we wouldn't be involved with this continuously, arguing how did the Russians get involved in our campaign, and all the lying and innuendos. And then on the big issues, and we've made this point so many times, on the big issues, there's no argument. Which side is good at protecting Edward Snowden? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, Pelosi said, earlier this year, he needs to be prosecuted. So, she's really in favor of whistleblowers. The other thing about the Ukraine thing is that's not well reported, because it can be very complicated. But the role of Ukrainian oligarchs in this is very interesting, because the current president himself is said to be backed by one of the oligarchs who was involved in this oil deal, this Burisma Holdings. So he may be in trouble because his guy. But here's the final word. Here's the news. All of these regime changes are about corruption. From the very beginning, it's all about corruption. Look back at the Kosovo. Look back at Clinton's war on Yugoslavia. the dust had barely settled when Madeleine Albright and Wesley Clark were not in there doing business, getting involved in mining and all sorts of things. Look at Libya. French Total was desperate to get in there and get that oil. It's all about corruption. It's all about a grab. It's all about the deep state in bed with the military-industrial complex, the worldwide military-industrial complex, and that is why we're for non-intervention, because it's all about corruption. You tell me that the Ukrainian people are better off now. They were richer than the Russians in the 90s, and now they're orders of magnitude poor. Things are getting worse. These things make matters worse. That is why we say no more regime change. Let's use our military to protect this country.
Very good. You know, the establishment, the deep state, has thrown just about everything they can at Trump. He has his shortcomings, but he really he's had a lot of things to overcome as they were thrown at him, and he generally has. He's held his ground, and he usually wins a lot of these PR fights. And I think there's something to this where people suggest, you know, he might be holding his cards to his vest, and in the next few weeks, if they look like they're really, really getting out on a limb, he'll come in and cut them off again. But that's a shame that you have to depend on that, but he's capable of doing that. It's sometimes when they talk about shift and all, they say, and even Pelosi, she seems to be real smart, but why do they do dumb things? And that's why do really smart people, think that interventionism is good? And I think, Daniel, you made the right point. It's power and corruption is what they want. Money and power. It isn't exactly the old-fashioned way of measuring IQ. It has to do with morality, as far as I'm concerned. So if we don't follow the advice of our founders, that said if a people is no longer moral, they can't defend the Constitution. And this pretense, this noise that we hear in these debates about we have to do this because we're going to protect the Constitution, and the president's undermining our Constitution. Well, there's a lot of undermining of the Constitution. I remember when the big debate came up on whether or not we should impeach Clinton. I was for impeaching him, but not for the stuff that they were doing. And at the time, I said, well, I don't like his foreign policy and a lot of other things. But I also said, you know what we need to do? We need to impeach the whole Congress. Of course, the people have a right to impeach by just voting them out. But once again, money talks, and the establishment and the political system is controlled by the deep state and the media. That is the big job. So that is the reason that our effort and the effort of many others like us are trying to get the truth out about our foreign policy, our monetary policy, the danger of the economic system that we have today, because it's only the understanding of these ideas that will make the difference. And I think if we desire to live in a free society, we have to pay attention. Then maybe the Constitution would have some meaning again. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.